The Winnipeg Jets may have a bit of a new timetable for being competitive. What might this team look like over the next 3 years? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, I thought I would talk a little bit about Winnipeg's future, because at this point, I think that's the way the team is looking. I don't think that this upcoming season is going to be one to be remembered in the usual sense. I think this year, I'm honestly expecting the Jets to maybe struggle to make the playoffs, and if they do make the playoffs, maybe even have a short outing. I don't think this team is primed for a deep run, but I'll be honest, I'm not that bothered about that. I think you've probably heard me talk about this before. A short playoff run this year doesn't bother me as much pending a few things, right? I think the biggest thing is that this team starts to play the right way. I've talked a lot about process being my central focus. I know some of you are a little more results-oriented, and it's fair. You aren't being paid to lose in this league, but I think for the Jets, winning doesn't have to be the be-all, end-all of this upcoming season, because after this year, I think the subsequent seasons are where you're going to be more and more focused. So we'll chat about that a little bit. I think the next 3 years, that's kind of the outlook that I have for what I would describe as Winnipeg's upcoming competitive window. Before we dive into that, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, I mentioned the next 3 years because I think that particular time range works quite nicely for a couple of reasons. For one thing, the Jets core is going to start turning over, and the guys that are rookies now and starting to filter into roster spots are going to have had a few years of NHL experience. Right now, I'm kind of looking at Shiberkov and of course, Lambert as having had relatively foolish seasons. I don't think that they're going to have, 82 games over the next couple of years each year, but I do think that they're going to relatively be, or hoping that they'll be relatively healthy and able to play most of the next couple of seasons. 100 plus games of NHL experience, maybe 120 if we're really fortunate, I think would be a pretty good foundation to build on. And at that point, you're going to start to figure out just where Lambert and Shiberkov end up ranking in your lineup. Ideally, both make the top 6. I think only one of them will, but if Shiberkov does, hey, that'd be pretty fantastic. Rashevsky, of course, is still overseas. I think once his, KHL career kind of winds down, he might make the jump when he's around 24 or 25. At that point, he's probably in his prime, and I don't know how much his game is going to immediately translate to North America, but hoping for him to be an impact player because we're going to be, staring down the potential losses of both Nick Ehlers and Kyle Connor. Ehlers maybe as soon as this year, Kyle Connor maybe in a couple of years after his deal expires. You've probably heard me talk about Connor. I think he's a very difficult proposition to try and figure out how you want to deal with his next contract, right? Because look, he's a fun player. He's got elite finishing, great skating, but he hasn't always shown the completeness to his game that would merit like a big $9 million kind of contract. It's that sort of hesitance that I feel that I'm kind of not sure what you do with him. I think there's been some talk about trading him in the final season of his deal, perhaps, and I think that remains a distinct possibility. But I also feel like the Jets are probably going to offer him a big contract. Now, what I'm kind of hoping for is by the time we get to this point, the Jets are going to have done a lot of research and they're going to understand that maybe re-signing and extending Kyle Connor isn't actually the best use of cap space. There's no doubt that he is an amazing fit for some team out there, but I don't know that it's necessarily the Jets. Winnipeg needs more from him in a lot of different areas of the game, and he just isn't going to grow out into that sort of player. Not at his age, he's in his late 20s now, and so what you see is kind of what you get with him. He has shown some changes under Bones, but those streaks, I would say, were relatively brief and probably not indicative of how he'll be the rest of his career. So I'm going to look more towards the Priors, and I think the Priors paint a fun player who's deeply, deeply flawed and maybe a little bit of a hard sell on a long-term contract. But again, with his finishing and stuff, it is hard to sort of walk away from that. But the reason that I look at, 3 years is because after the next 2 seasons, then you've got the third, you'll be towards the end of a couple of ELCs. Perhaps Lambert and Shibakov are both going to have had, relatively full runs through their early contracts. And at this point, I'm also sort of expecting Ville Heinola to also have made a big enough impact to where he's already signed an extension or 2 and is looking to become a full-time regular. The Jets at this point, their defense is probably going to look a little bit different. I would expect, DeMello probably getting less ice time at this point. Elias Salamonson, maybe in the top 4. Obviously, he is, he's an intriguing prospect, and there's a chance that he may not pan out, but I have a lot of confidence, and I continue to sort of feel that he is going to be the natural partner for Morrissey at some point. I don't know when that will happen, but it's kind of what I've earmarked. And I think in a couple of years, I wouldn't be shocked if he starts to push for a role like that in one of the upcoming preseasons. But if all he is in 3 years is your second pairing guy, that's really amazing. To have that by his 22 or age 23 season, I think you really can't complain. As far as the third pairing is concerned, you're probably looking at one of Heinola or maybe DeMello paired with somebody else. Coughlin and of course Fleury have been brought in to perhaps compete for a spot. Alphonse Frey may be in sort of a competitive spot. There's also guys like Kuzman and a few other depth defenders who could potentially make their mark. I know Garrett Brown is still out there somewhere, apparently doing pretty well in college. So I guess the big question is up front, right? If you do lose some veterans and you start to maybe introduce some young rookies, will that team be in a better competitive spot? I do think so. I think the Jets are going to have a good mixture of, at that point, relatively established young, skilled talent and guys like Brad and Nikita, maybe Dimitri if he comes over. Would also like to see maybe Jacob Julian get a look at this point. I think he'd probably be more like year 3. He won't have had much pro time at this point, maybe just a year or 2 at most. And so I think it's important to kind of start to introduce some of these guys. Maybe Walton won't be far behind. Zilkin will probably have been a NHLer of some sort by this point, maybe a year or 2 in. So I think the Jets will have had, some nice roster turnover in their depth departments. The high-end skill is maybe the one part that I do wonder if they're going to lack some high-end elite offensive punch, but I'm hoping that some of these kids step up and really start to turn that around. And maybe the Jets in there somewhere somehow have a lottery pick if Hellebuck really struggles, but I tend to think he'll be good for the next several years. And so I'm thinking, if the Jets are smart, they make some intelligent deals, they bring in some good, a good mixture of veteran talent and maybe some, early to mid-20s guys who are RFAs that maybe don't fit their current teams, but would certainly fit the Jets, and the Jets maybe move some prospects and assets out for that could do nicely. So I think the next 3 years are really promising for the Jets. I think this year is going to be the first year where we're going to see some real potential for growth. And I think as the team starts to adopt better habits, better patterns of analysis, and smarter decision-making, you're going to see this franchise start to take that turn into better territory. I do ask that you be patient because I think this transition is not going to be fast, but I do think that the Jets can expedite it in certain ways by, making some good value additions, maybe taking some smart risks, and using information to the best of its ability. So, listen, I'm not going to sit here and say the Jets are going to be Cup contenders in 3 years, but they might not be as far off as they seem right now. So, all that to say, be optimistic, be a little bit excited. I am kind of looking forward to what this next era of Winnipeg Jets hockey looks like. Now, between all of that, of course, there's still, this upcoming season, and I wanted to grade and sort of reassess Winnipeg's overall offseason grade. I would say mine probably hasn't changed a ton, but the Jaeger or the Yager, I always get it wrong. Sorry, the Yager McGroarty trade maybe changes my assessment slightly. We'll talk about that in just a quick moment. But before we go too much further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. You've heard us talk about FanDuel over the past year or two, America's #1 sportsbook. It's safe, secure. It's a lot of fun for those of you who love following all of the top sports. You can get everything from soccer to American football to auto racing. I mean, they really have every sport covered. But we've got something a little bit different for you this time. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. With a YouTube TV base plan, you'll also be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. For those of you who might be fans of the Ravens and you don't live in Baltimore, which I feel for you a little bit, that means you can actually watch the games on your subscription, and you don't even have to be around the area. Isn't that pretty nice? I guess that means I could watch the Vikings if I wanted to, but I'm not a Vikings fan, so good luck to you JJ McCarthy truthers out there. But all you do need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel your trial at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for joining us as we are chatting a little bit about, Winnipeg's future. And I also thought, perhaps it's time to pull it back a little bit and talk about Winnipeg's current offseason. Obviously, some of you may be a little bit disappointed by what the Jets have done. Some of you have maybe not been surprised. I think this is more or less gone most of the way of what I thought. The McGroarty thing was obviously a weird wrinkle. That whole saga I didn't really have on my bingo card, but it is what it is. It happened, and the Jets, I would say, made the most of it. But I did just say that trade perhaps changes my assessment of this offseason because that was one of the biggest things the Jets needed to sort out. We'll chat about what I guess my revised offseason grade is. I'm going to be, spoilery here. It's not going to change a lot. I think I gave the Jets like a B- the last time. So kind of give that your base level score from the first assessment. Before we dive into my updated rankings, just wanted to say thanks again for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day. While you're at it, be sure to make your second listen the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcasts, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, like I said, I think, this offseason has generally been good for the Jets. I'm not going to sit here and say they slammed it out of the park. I don't think it was that kind of offseason, and I don't think, how do I say this? I don't think it was ever supposed to be something like that. I think the Jets were going to try and avoid making any really bad decisions and just focus more on internal development for the future. I think that, having an analytics summit, hearing some of Arneal's recent comments, all that stuff makes me think that at a high level, the team gets what it needs to do going forward. And I think if there is one thing that this team does this offseason that sets itself up for success, it is that. Obviously, big trades are nice. I think making some smart signings are certainly, more than appreciated. But if there was one thing that I desperately wanted this team to do, it is to set itself up for success with good overall foundational decision-making and starting to build out the infrastructure to really support that. And I think the Jets are on that path. I can't sit here and say that we have insight into every single piece of what's happening. We can only take the information that we've heard from other interviewers and from, what the coaching staff has publicly put out there. But again, from the comments that we've heard from Scott and, the rest of the staff, I think we're moving in the right direction. And I think that is a really big deal for this team because it's a big maturation phase. And sure, many other teams have already gone through that, but relatively speaking, the Jets are still a newer-ish iteration of a relocated franchise. They've basically been around for like 13 years now. Not that long in the grand scheme of things, although some of the stuff you probably would have wished they would have kickstarted maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but it is what it is. Still definitely not too late, and I think that is still the most important part, right? If you're going to make the change now, that's totally fine. Just make it and do it right, and I think that is the direction that the team is trending. And so with all of that sort of context, obviously, in terms of actual moves, the team hasn't made a lot this offseason. And that's maybe where it's been, I guess you could call it a little underwhelming. I'm personally not like super disappointed just because I don't think I expected a ton. I did think that they were going to be maybe a little bit more exploratory in free agency just because I thought that there might be some smart gambles that you could take. I still think the Zadina one is one that's maybe worth investigating. Yamamoto, I did actually see something about him maybe signing a PTO with the Bruins. Guys like that, I think, are smart value adds if you want to round out your depth and try and make some in-camp competition for your kids. With the general signings the Jets already made, though, the DeMello one, you probably know, I feel it was all right. I like Dylan a lot. I think he's a really good player. His contract is just a touch expensive, but in terms of retaining probably the top free agent right-handed deal on the market that wasn't Chris Tanev, I think the Jets did fine. I think it's a fair enough deal. By year 3, he's probably going to be in a second or third pairing role at that point anyways, and so you're basically paying for the first couple of seasons, which is kind of part of why I still look at it as like that 3-year window. The other signings, Coughlin and Fleury, I thought were smart adds. The Moose have also added some forwards here and there. There was that little Jared Anderson-Dolan signing that was, I thought, a smart value add for the Moose because, listen, the Moose need help this offseason. The loss of Lambert and Chibrikov is going to be huge for them this year. So getting some reinforcements, you really can't hate it. Otherwise, in terms of the big boy deal, right, the trade, you heard my perspective last week on it. I thought it was fair value. I thought it was a trade that mostly made sense for both sides, maybe with one or two little caveats. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Jagr is the world's best prospect. I think he's a really good player, and I think he's got a bright future. It wasn't like the Jets traded for McKinnon, though. You saw that Rod Peterson thing. Whatever he was on when he said that you're getting the next McKinnon, probably want to pipe down on that one a little bit. I'm excited about Jagr. Jagr, I think he's got really intriguing potential. I think most likely as a middle sixer, his tools could grade out as top 6 at some point. I think he's got some work to do to get there, but the release and the scoring instincts are certainly there. He's a great skater. He's working on adding some strength and weight to a pretty good-sized frame. So all that to say that I think he's trending in the right direction. And this next season for him is going to be one to really keep a close eye on for Winnipeg's near future considerations. Because once he makes the pro leagues, I don't think it's going to be that long before he potentially starts pushing into a spot on the Jets. So, in that respect, I think that's cool. I do think McGroarty might be a slightly higher grade of prospect by a slight margin, I guess, just because he has a slightly more proven track record at a higher level. But again, I mean, at some point it's kind of splitting hairs. And the other thing is, organizationally speaking, Jagr as a center kind of matters more for the Jets than McGroarty as a winger. So, that there's, I think it was a trade that made sense for both parties. Apparently, some GMs thought the Jets actually got a better return than what they thought Winnipeg was going to get. So I think Chevy probably did a pretty good job here. Seems like he did exactly what he needed to get the best return. And seemingly when the Jets are backed into a corner, that is his general thing. Now, there is one last move that hasn't happened yet, and it's the Perfetti deal, which could change your offseason assessment by a lot. But as of right now, I'm sitting at a B+. I think I would say that the Jets avoided mostly terrible decisions. Whether they did that intentionally or by circumstance, you can certainly debate. Apparently, they were sort of interested in Martin Nietzsche, but then because he didn't want to extend, that deal fell through. And I would actually say that that's probably a good thing. Nietzsche is a fun player. I think he had some warning signs that he maybe wasn't the kind of player the Jets really needed to bring in. So for me, I think this offseason's been fine. I think the Jets are making some smart internal upgrades. I think that they're doing some stuff for the long term that I really like. And, if that's what you get out of this offseason, I really can't complain. I think that some of this stuff is more important even than making a big trade. So, for the future of the Jets, I am cautiously optimistic. But I know some of you are probably like, not feeling it as much. And I totally respect that. I know that you're probably hoping for a little bit more, but maybe, just maybe, this is all going to be worth it here over the next couple of years. Now, speaking of which, obviously I've alluded to multiple times the upcoming season, and we're getting about to be about a month and a half away from the start of the season, and I want to talk about why I'm a little bit excited about the season, even if it doesn't result in a deep playoff run. But before we dive into all of that, just wanted to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your vehicle alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home that championship title. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hey friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us as we're just wrapping up with, what I will tentatively call a not really preseason, but like pre-upcoming season hype montage, I guess. So this season, I'm actually excited for. I think this year, Winnipeg is ticking off a lot of the boxes of what I've been asking for probably years. A renewed focus on youth development, a renewed focus on building out an analytics infrastructure to help give this team better tools to make smarter decisions, and not getting tied up in really bad contracts, relying on your youth. All of that stuff for me is generally what Winnipeg is preaching right now. Still time for them to kind of put it into actual practice, but all that to say that I think Winnipeg is moving in the right direction. And this year, the reason that I think I'm most excited for it is, we have new special teams coaching staff. It has to be an improvement, right? There's no way it can possibly be worse than the last coaching staff. No disrespect, but like the last couple of folks really didn't get the job done. And I think it's time for a refresh. I'm hoping the PK looks at least league average. A league average power play would also make my eyes not bleed as much. So crossing my fingers for that. But more importantly, Arneal seemingly is a guy who's open to a lot more. He may not be the most progressive coach. He might not even be the most experienced at this point. He doesn't really have a big track record at the NHL level, just some short stints with the Jets and one with the Blue Jackets that kind of was a little painful. So, you could argue that there's probably not a lot of reason to be super excited, but in his interviews, again, I think what I always come back to is that he says the right things. He's sort of preaching the right sorts of concepts, at least so far on paper. And so long as he is willing to be patient with the kids and really work with them through their strengths, their weaknesses, all of that, I think that's a good thing. I would only, ask him to not be reactionary at times. I think that there's going to be some good days and some bad days for guys like Brad. I think he is a coach who has learned a lot since Columbus, and based on what he's talked about, I think he is going to be willing to be, flexible, open-minded, and I think that that's good. His reaction to being asked about the first line already told me his headspace is in the right area. So for me, I'm looking forward to a renewed focus on making the most of this team's talents. If Arniel is able to identify what this team is good at and make the most of it, that's great. If he can find a way to not inhibit and block his talent from being good at what they're good at, that's also great. If this team, still has a relatively decent defensive structure, but also encourages 5v5 chance creation, awesome. I think this is a good year to start learning how to play the game the right way again. With a younger team, a faster team, one that's going to be hopefully more modernized. The Jets got really far with how they were operating for like the last 10 years with this past couple of seasons. So now it's time to move towards the next step and build for the future. And I think that's what I want from this year. If this team shows real progress, because they're not like a bad team. It's just that they need to make a couple of key changes to become a cup contender. And if they start that process now, again, like I said, within the next 3 years, they may be back in a deeper playoff run conversation, maybe even faster than that timeline. So all that to say, I'm really hoping for, a big year of progress. That's all I want. Progress. Show that you're growing as a team, show that you're growing as an organization, that you're leaning on the kids, letting them help carry, this veteran core that's aging out. We've only got a few more years of Hellebuck probably being at this level before we may start to see him tail off. And so at this point, make this season one for growth for everyone, and move this team forward in the right direction. The players are seemingly on board. The coaching staff is seemingly on board. And all I can say is I'm probably going to regret this, but I am excited for the upcoming season. I'd be curious to know if you're feeling the same way. Are you looking forward to the year? Are you perhaps dreading it slightly? What's your general vibe around the season? I know some of you were going to say if the Jets don't make the playoffs, fire Chevy. I'm not really there at this point. I actually think that he's generally handled this offseason pretty well. So long as he keeps doing that, I'm not going to hold it against them if the Jets fail to make the playoffs. Now, if they tank and look completely helpless, I might have some questions, but I don't think that that's going to happen. So, I'm just ready for Jets hockey to come back. It's been way too long without it. We've had to come up with some fun content over the last few months. I'm thankful to Rucker McGroarty. He has been actually a huge help for getting this channel to 1,000 subscribers. I was trying to get something special for you for that milestone. We'll see if it comes through. If not, we may try something else, but I do want to have at least some kind of a celebration episode with some special content. But for tonight's show, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for continuing to listen. If this is your first listen of this show, thank you so much for seeking us out and finding us. If you are a returning listener or a subscriber, as always, I love you. Thank you so much. Appreciate your support. And as always, have a great night and go Jets go.